Coming up on the Woven Energy podcast.
Animism is absolutely not a belief system. It's only a belief system to people who think that belief systems are important. It's adaptive. It's not no reason. It's not a bunch of primitive people sat around believing things. It's there for a purpose, and if it wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. So you need your animism, your amazing link into the natural world to keep you alive in the hunting activity. Don't lose your connection to reality. In fact, rejoice in your connection to reality. Belief is also important to settled peoples, and how settled peoples tend to see everything else in the world through the lenses of their own culture. Before animism becomes beliefs, animism is a kind of attitude. And before it's a kind of attitude, it's a reverence for nature. And before it's a reverence for nature, it's an adaptive hook into the environment that's absolutely essential to survival.
Welcome to the Woven Energy podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. This is episode 11, and we are here, as always, to talk about shamanism from the ground up. However, actually, in this episode, we're going to leave shamanism on one side and go for a short stroll into the land of its closest neighbour, animism. We are going back to the basics, and we are going to build up a picture of what animism is and how it relates to shamanism. I think this is a good opportunity to maybe put forward a more complete idea of what animism is, because doing some simple research for this episode led me down various paths, usually ending up in a debate centered around animism being a belief system and having to, quote unquote, subscribe to the faiths and beliefs of animism in much the same way as you would a faith-based religion. And if we look at the heart of animism, wherever we find it, so by that I mean not getting caught up in the academia of it, it's all the same. I think as we've talked about before, it's all the same. It's also worth pointing out that shamanism and animism are so inextricably linked that if you are interested in becoming a shaman, whatever that may mean, you kind of have to become an animist. Again, whatever that may mean, words and labels. The great irony being animism is about getting rid of that stuff. So yeah, because the two are linked, this episode will help you with your shamanism. So in this episode, we take a good look at animistic societies. We look at the three main activities of animists, how animist societies move towards pastoral and agricultural societies. And we also look at the effect of religion on animism and why spreading faith and belief amongst the people kept the powers that be at the top. And also at the end of the episode, I asked Damon for one piece of solid advice he could give people so that they basically don't mess up when venturing into the world of shamanism and animism. And his response is quite simply profound, so stick around to hear it. So Damon, to kick this episode off before diving into what animism is a little bit deeper, and so we're all on the same page here, what is the difference between shamanism and animism?
So last time we talked about human origins to a certain extent, and we talked about human beings evolving as originally tree-dwelling creatures, and the way of life of tree-dwelling creatures is obviously influenced by the fact that they're in trees, but they have something in common with all of the other animals, which is that they need to maintain a state of what we would call chillicity. They cannot separate themselves off from their environment, because that is from the point of view of a wild animal, that's just about the most dangerous thing you can do. It will get you killed pretty quickly, and therefore you're not going to pass on your genes, and you won't perpetuate your particular genetic flow. So that at the very, very base level, that attachment to reality, that close interconnectedness with the reality of the environmental niche that any animal, including human beings or our primate ancestors, has, at the very, very base level, that is animism. There are implications of that fact that also come under the heading of animism. For instance, people and animals, primates who are close to nature, they they often display some level of a joy in nature. In some way, nature enlivens them. It's not something that's unpleasant to them. And in human terms, a lot of people who are animists, this expresses itself in a kind of reverence for the natural world. It's not worship. We talked about quite a few times now how belief is also important. The idea of belief and faith is also important to settled peoples, and how settled peoples tend to see everything else in the world through the lenses of their own culture. And therefore, when we, for instance, in anthropology, when we go looking at animistic peoples, we go trying to find out what their beliefs are, making the pre-assumption that they've actually got beliefs in the first place. And, if you look for something hard enough, you'll find it. And maybe they do have beliefs. But what I will tell you is that any animistic culture you wish to pick, their beliefs are far less important to them than their beliefs are to anthropologists.
Well, here's the dictionary definition of animism. The belief in a supernatural power that organizes and animates the material universe. I mean, there's so much there for a skeptic to pounce on.
Yeah.
Not that that's particularly anything to worry about, but
cultural baggage.
How would you say that animism isn't a belief?
Animism is absolutely not a belief system. It's only a belief system to people who think that belief systems are important. Animists really don't. This is really, in that definition that you just read out,
to be fair, it's one of a few.
That definition was a good one to picture, because that definition actually tells you far more about our culture than it does about animism. Yeah. It actually tells you a huge amount about the culture, our very non-animistic culture, and what's important in our non-animistic culture. So what I would say is also that, we talked about the origins of exoteric religion, and how, my feeling is that I think I've said before, is the vast majority of time, 2 million, 3 million years, whatever you want to say, that we humans, however you define humans, have been on this planet, we have been animistic hunter-gatherer societies. Before you start chatting about hunter-gatherer societies, let's just rewind a tiny bit, and I do want to ask you the question, because we have just talked about cultural biases and stuff. So I'm going to ask you direct: what is animism? I just explained it. What I was going to go on to say is what it became, but in its essence, animism is the connection between an animal and its environment.
Right. Okay, because you mentioned chelicity as well, and if anybody's just tuning into this episode and perhaps not quite sure what we mean by chelicity, we've actually done a big 3-part kind of mini-series on this. You can check out episodes 7, 8, and 9, where we go very much in detail into what chelicity is. And I remember, Damon, you were saying once that chelicity is like the foundation of animism, or it's like the start of becoming an animist.
In some ways, chelicity. Yeah, in some ways, chelicity is animism. The issue with animism is, do we want to, animism, like shamanism, is a modern term. And do we want to wrestle with there's two things with both shamanism and animism that we could wrestle with if we want to. Do we want to wrestle with the definition of animism, for instance, from an anthropological point of view? Or do we want to use animism as a convenient label for something that is a recurring theme in early human societies, again and again and again, that's the same theme? So what I would say is the existence of the word animism, although it's a modern term, it rightly picks up on a commonality that exists in those societies. But the people who came up with that term really, 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 at a very fundamental, misunderstood those self-same societies. And they didn't misunderstand them in terms of what they were told by the people that they investigated, for instance, the anthropologists. They didn't misunderstand what was told to them. They misunderstood in terms that they asked the wrong questions because of their cultural bias. They asked questions about belief, and therefore you find animism again and again defined as the belief that there are gods and spirits in rocks and trees and stuff. But animism was there long before human beings were capable of believing things. Animism is there in primate populations. Animism is there in what I call animism, is there in canid populations, for instance. Animism is a creature's or an animal's involvement with nature, but it also refers to the reverence, the parental nature that exists between an animal and its parent, its real parent, not its pretend parent, not its parent that's written in some holy book, its real parent, i.e. its real spiritual parent, i.e. nature, Altandechil. Animism is both of those things. The efficacy of animism, which, as we've said, is a to a certain extent, it's a synonym for chillicity. There are slight differences whether you're looking at chillicity from an animistic point of view or you're looking at chillicity from a shamanistic point of view. Members of early hunter-gatherer societies had chillicity. They didn't have to work on it. They just had it. Just in the same way that, say, bonobos today. They don't have to work on chillicity. They don't have to work on their chillicity. They've already got it. What happened, which is why I started to talk about hunter-gatherer societies, what happened in the move to pastoralism, which I think we've mentioned before, is that the shamans within the group started to take in a more moralistic, ethical, exoteric religious role within the group. It started off very lightweight, and then it progressed and progressed. And the ideas that were there, this kind of reverence for nature and the spirits within nature, those things became political pawns in social maneuvering within those groups, because, as we've said, pastoral societies have a higher level of comfort than hunter-gatherer societies. They have a small, nowhere near as much as in sedentary settled societies, but they have a small buffer zone. And so if you like, it was in those societies, in pastoral societies, for instance, Mongolian society, but obviously at a much earlier date, though probably not as early as people think, that shamans invented exoteric religion. Shamans invented the idea of belief and faith, and then they used them in support of the emerging power structures within those populations. Pastoral societies can support larger societies than hunter-gatherer societies. They're not huge societies, but they can support larger societies, as, you know.
What
China.
would be a typical number for hunter-gatherer societies and pastoral societies?
Well, hunter-gatherer societies we've talked about, if you have too many people in a group. So I saw somewhere somebody said that a population density of 1 person per square kilometre is about what a hunter-gatherer society can support. So it's very, very small numbers, 10 to 20 people in a group. As pastoral societies, if they're very well organised, I mean very, very well organised, can support far larger numbers, as both China and Europe found out to our cost in the sort of 13th century, when the Mongols appeared from nowhere and overran us all. It was, pastoral societies, how big they can grow depends entirely on their organizational structure. But the Mongol Empire, the biggest empire that the world has ever seen, proved that if your organization is as good as Genghis Khan, better known as Genghis Khan, could arrange, then that could be a very large number of people indeed.
Okay, I love this. This is a really good look at the origins of hunter-gatherer societies. So have you said everything you needed to say about the how hunter-gatherer societies moved into pastoral societies?
Not at all, Joe, no.
Okay, do carry on.
So So what I was saying was that there was a change there, but the problem with approaching, I'm not criticizing anthropology as a subject. It's a great subject. It's an interesting subject. But what I'm saying is really that my feeling is the wrong people were looking at this issue. I'm not saying that anthropologists shouldn't have been looking at this issue. They absolutely should have been. But maybe it's more that some people who could have given much better insight to this subject, perhaps biologists, for instance, tended to shy away from it. And in my view of the world, animism and shamanism both arose for a purpose. Animism arose for the purpose of keeping any animal alive within its environmental niche by giving it a good, strong awareness of its environmental niche. So, for instance, we talked about Burajik Harate in a previous podcast.
Yeah, BAT. So that's the first component of Cholicity, and that's episode 7.
Yeah. Shamanism arose because within groups of social animals, evolution put pressures on those groups that resulted in a further development of animism, and threw up individuals within those groups who had, as we've said, who had an interest in what goes on under the metaphorical bonnet of nature, and developed a range of techniques that could be used to protect, care for, and nurture the rest of the group. Now, to me, both of those things, animism and shamanism, are adaptive, i.e., if you have animism, then you, as a species, you are more likely to survive. If you have shamanism as a social species, you are, again, more likely to survive, especially if you come down from the trees and start competing with lions. So this is the way I see animism and shamanism. Now, I'm very well aware that that's not an anthropological definition of the two words, but I'm not here to talk about word definitions. I'm here to talk about real phenomena that exist in the real world. So what I would say is that these terms, animism and shamanism, they may have come from disciplines that are maybe not the most appropriate disciplines for how I see animism and shamanism. But in my opinion, whatever the rights and wrongs of how they approach that study, the fact is that they did rightly pick up on the thing that pick up on the fact that these things are the same thing. Animism is the same thing all over the world, and shamanism is the same thing all over the world. In terms of your question about the difference between pastoral and hunter-gatherer societies, a lot of the research on shamanism, and I'm no different, I've done a lot of academic research on Mongolian shamanism, which Mongols are a pastoral society. The two main places where you find shamanism are pastoral societies and hunter-gatherer societies. But actually, there's a good reason why most of the research has been done on pastoral societies or similar kinds of societies, is that actual real true hunter-gatherer societies in this day and age are extremely rare. So, for instance, there are people called the San people in southern Africa who until very recently were very, very recently were a true hunter-gatherer society. They are very, very animistic. And they, in their lives, spirit animals play a huge part in their lives. And like all hunter-gatherer societies, there are 3 things that they do. There are pretty much only 3 major activities that they undertake. One is hunting, one is gathering, and one is shamanism. But in undertaking each of those 3 activities, a better way to put it is, in order to enable them to undertake each of those 3 activities, they must be animists. So the Kang people Kang is their name for Tengar, the Sand people. That thing which underlies nature, the great spirit, if you want to call him that in exoteric terms, it's quite interesting that they're familiar with a lot of different animals, and hunting is obviously a major part in their lives. Hunting, gathering, that's pretty much what they do. They take as their major spirit animal the praying mantis, which is kind of related to this Kang, their version of Tengar, which is very interesting to me. I mean, some of the other spirit animals that are associated with the Sand people, the eland, snakes, caterpillars, even mongooses. It's quite interesting to me, and the one that they're most famous for. It's not actually the forefront of their animistic worldview, but the one that they're most famous for is the giraffe. They do this amazing giraffe spirit dance before they go hunting, and in various other as a kind of healing thing. Yeah. And it's very cool, and it's got some cool music that goes along with it. Joe, you'll love it if you haven't come across it.
Have you got some videos of this?
I'm sure you'll find it. it. They are quite famous because they are one of the very, very few. We talked about the Evenki people in a previous podcast.
They're the ones that came up with that had the name shaman.
That's the people. Yeah. That's the people, yeah. And the Yakut people who are associated with them. And as we said, some small numbers of these people still live by hunting. They're still hunter-gatherers, some small numbers, but it's not the whole society. But with the Kang, it's till very, very recently, it was pretty much the whole of their society, not a big society, that were hunter-gatherers. So they are an exceptionally rare and special group of people. And the way that they live their lives is to a certain extent, although of course they've been influenced by the Mayasta, they've been influenced by us, and have they ever been messed around by the countries? I mean, the nation states that they live in some pretty
common theme, that, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. But they have very, very animistic outlook on life and attitudes. I mean, for instance, one of the things that's quite common in animism is, although hunter-gatherers are hunters, they have a notion, an adaptive notion. Again, coming back to this evolutionary adaptiveness, one of the and part of the reverence for nature. They don't hate the animals that they're hunting, and they don't think they're nothing either. They have a reverence for the animals that they're hunting. And they have a notion, which is that in one of their legends, there was a kind of, I don't know what you call it, a holy eland, that was beloved of one of their spirits in one of their myths. And this was actually killed accidentally, killed unknowingly, by some sort of relatives of the great spirit or something of that nature. But they believed that a lot of trouble fell out of the fact that the animal wasn't ready to be hunted. And this is quite interesting from a biological point of view, because if you want to wipe out a population of animals, if you want it to go extinct, then kill the young ones. That's if you want to actively do that, kill the young ones. That's pretty much how that works, But the San have this concept of an animal being ready to be hunted. They're not going to hunt it if it's too young, because they know, I don't mean they know in their mind, but they know in their animism, they know in their mind and their spirit and their body, that if they kill the young, the animals that are too young, they will wipe out their prey species for future generations.
There isn't a disregard for life, is there? There's a
reference, absolutely. Yeah. And for instance,
is that something that's prevalent in most animistic societies, or all of them?
I would say in all, yeah. And for instance, there's some old cave rock paintings and carvings from a place called Tassilian Adger in North Africa. I'm not sure I can pronounce that correctly. This is not, this is not but basically that's if you read it off the page, that's what it looks like. And they're from about 10,000 years ago, and they are obviously created by a heavy shamanistic hunter-gatherer society. And I think Terence McKenna talks about some of these, the bee-headed shaman and stuff like this in some of his books. But some of the other artwork is actually equally telling, that comes from there, and that they show the animals, and some of the animal art is absolutely beautiful. The animals are painted in this beautiful, reverential way, and carved in this reverential way. And they are some of them are the animals these people were hunting. And in the portrayals of hunting among that art, you remember the little guys in Fan Quan's painting, and then the enormous towering mountain range of nature towering behind them that they're sort of missing. In their paintings, the animals, the hunters are tiny little guys, and the animals are these big, powerful, majestic creatures, and so a lot of in Mongol society as well, when they eat an animal, they will make an offering, they will make or give thanks for the animal's sacrifice on their behalf, and pretty much all hunter-gatherer societies are involved in that kind of activity. So in terms of what is animism, all of these things to me are features of animism, but what I want to portray is that these things are adaptive from an evolutionary perspective. They're not there for no reason. They're not there because these guys just want to believe in this crazy animism thing, in the same way that you would believe in an exoteric religion. They're not there for that reason. These guys didn't invent this stuff. It's there because if they didn't have that animism in their lives, they wouldn't be there. In order to pursue their lives, they would be dead. They would be extinct. So what I'm saying is, what really is animism? Yeah, sorry.
It's a process which, like an evolutionary process, which is inherent within us. To keep us alive.
Animism is a direct result of evolution. Evolutionary pressures within the niches of various animals, especially social animals, force those animals to be animistic. And as those animals become social animals, the pressures, those evolutionary pressures, cause that animism to grow and develop and take on a richer form. But animism is the religion, if you like, in inverted commas, that God, if you want to use the word God, although that means all sorts of crazy things to various different people, God is nature, and nature is not just our parent, but the parent of all living things on Earth. Now, nature doesn't, even for me, nature doesn't care whether or not I feel grateful for that. I feel a reverence for nature over that, but I do, in the same way that I would feel grateful to my own biological parents. I feel a reverence for what nature has given me, and thanks. And if you go to Mongolia, especially if you get outside Ulaanbaatar, it won't take you very long to see Mongols making offerings. Their offerings, they're not making just some alcohol or something, making thanks to nature. Making offerings to nature, they're doing that. They're not doing that out of dominate the culture style. Ooh, you are so mighty. I have to pray to you to make sure everything's okay for me. It's like, thank you so much for this wonderful life that you've given us. It's a gratitude. It's not a worship. And so one of the things I would just say that distinguishes, and again, animism from exoteric religions, is that the emphasis for that type of activity in animism is based around gratitude and reverence, whereas in exoteric religions, it's more like worship. And
it's easy to see how it transitioned, isn't it?
Very easy, yeah. And you can see where it actually came from. As we said, elites within societies, take Babylonian society, for instance, or Sumerian society. Those elites start to feel like, oh, look, what we're rich. We've got all these luxuries that all the other people in the country haven't got. And then they started to ask the obvious question: how do we ensure that we maintain these luxuries? We keep this luxurious lifestyle. How do we make sure we don't lose this and somebody else gets it? Well, one answer to that is you build armies and walls and kingdoms and all that kind of thing. But another answer to that is, you've got to deal with the quote unquote enemy within. That is, my own people may be jealous of the fact that I have far more than they have. What's to stop them overthrowing me? Now, if I weave myself into their myths and legends, if I weave my role in the world into their what at one time was animism and the ideas that they have, and I start to shift their focus from reverence and gratitude onto worship and belief, then I can effectively, as happened, for instance, with the Emperor of Japan, I can make myself a god. And the Pharaoh in Egypt, I can make myself a god. I am, if you like, their belief system, their faith and belief, which becomes we have caused to become so important to them. I can put myself at the top of that, and now they not only don't want to get rid of me, they want to increase my level of luxury, and they want to help me to maintain my power, because I am the focus of their belief system. Now, another issue to think about is, if you're a person in a society and you're not a king, and you want to become a king and have a kingdom, one of the ways you can do that is to raise an army, and a bigger army than the other guy, and you can go and beat them. But another way to do that is to come up with a new exoteric religion, of which you are the supreme person. You are the god. Yeah, and then you spread your religion among the people, your exoteric religion among the people. They believe in you, and then over time, as their belief takes off, you or your descendants or the people who are authorized by you, they then take over, and they take over from the grassroots upwards, if you like. You replace one exoteric religion with another exoteric religion, and in doing so, you replace one power with another power.
It sounds like a huge can of worms we could be opening right now, Tim.
Yes, I'm not mentioning any particular religions or names or anything like that, but I'm just saying that there is an approach. So what you can see is exotericism is very useful to those people. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't exoteric people in the world who haven't done good things. Of course there are. And there aren't exoteric people in the past who haven't done good things for the world. Of course there are. All I'm saying is that you can see where the change in focus from reverence and gratitude to nature to worship and if you like, subservience to a supreme being, an imagined supreme being, who either is or authorizes a human individual on earth to be the head of your society. You can see where and why the switch came.
Do you think that transition happened on an individual, like somebody was, individual basis, or do you think that just happened collectively and naturally?
Unfortunately, my personal, I don't know. There's no way of knowing. There's no, recorded records of this stuff. But unfortunately, my suspicion is that although exoteric religions went on to do huge damage to shamanism and esotericism, actually, my suspicion is that they were actually invented by shamans in the first place. That's my view of the matter. Yeah.
Okay, so I interrupted you there. Do carry on.
No, that's fine. But yeah, this kind of idea of worship, reference for a high and mighty power, is something that's reinforced by Terence McKenna's Dominator culture. What you've got to remember as a member of such a culture, or not necessarily that we're a member of culture. Certainly in the Western world, we're a bit more laid back about these things these days. Or some of us are. But I would say that when we take the results of that culture, that dominator culture, worship of high and mighty powers. And then we go back and we look at the animist societies from whence we came long ago. What do we see? Do we see what's really going on in those animist societies, or do we see our miasma? And what I'm suggesting is that animism is two things. One, it's a real thing that's been correctly identified as one thing that exists throughout the world. Certainly in hunter-gatherer and pastoral societies, but also it's also our view of ourselves inadvertently, like that brilliant definition. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the brilliant definition that you read out. I just thought if I wanted to use an example of the miasma at work, that definition would be really, if we were doing a podcast on the miasma, I might start with that definition,
The belief very, very in a supernatural power that organizes and animates the material universe.
To give you an example, yeah, exactly. To give you an example that animism is adaptive, we go back to those three activities that hunter-gatherer societies. Incidentally, pastoralism, there's some evidence that pastoralism is actually pretty recent. I mean, for instance, far more recent than the domestication of the dog that we talked about. It's a very, very difficult thing to pin down to a date, but there's some evidence that it may have been as recent as 12 to 13,000 years ago. That pastoralism started to evolve. So you think we've been hunter-gatherers since, at least 2 million years, and even pastoralism, Well,
that's kind of the widely accepted date at which civilization happened in about between 10 and 12,000 years ago.
It depends what you call. So in a way, pastoralism was a soft lead into agriculturalism and civilization. Yeah. So, but to give you an example of how that's adaptive, if you imagine yourself as a hunter-gatherer, and you are, so you're a hunter-gatherer, you're a human. You know my definition of human by now. Mm-hmm. You're probably not a Homo sapiens, but you're a human. Say 500,000 years ago, 400,000 years ago, something of that nature. You're going to go out hunting. Your main weapon, let's not call it a weapon, your main hunting tool is a spear. And fortunately, you have shaman in your group, or the groups that have come before you have had shamans, and these shamans have by this time, 500,000 years ago, they're pretty smart. They've been pretty smart cookies for a long time, and although all you've got is a wooden spear, you've also got a shaman, and this is a difference between having a shaman and not having a shaman for an animistic society at that time. So it's a wooden spear, but it isn't any old stick that's just been a point sharpened. Yeah, it doesn't have an arrowhead. It doesn't have a metal or stone arrowhead or spear point on it. It's just a sharpened stick, but it's a amazingly aerodynamic, cleverly shaped, extremely lethally sharp stick. It is there's a place called Schöningen in Germany where they actually found some of these things preserved, which might be worth looking up if anybody's interested. These things, I mean, just looking at them, they're terrifyingly wicked looking things, and they're tapered. They're tapered in a way that makes them aerodynamic. Do you remember in the Olympic javelin, they had to ban aerodynamic javelins because they were frightened. Was it Jan Zelazny or whatever he was called? They were frightened he was going to throw one into the crowd. So they had to change the design of the javelin to make it come down quicker. These things are like that.
There's a nice analogy in that statement.
So the key point is whichever shaman created one of those things, that shaman at whatever level in his mind or spirit, his body, he had some understanding of aerodynamics. And actually the spear holes that they found in animal bones, very often shoulder bones are quite good because they're a big flat plate and the spear would go in there sometimes. And the spear holes that they found from that sort of time period in animal bones, that these things can be examined microscopically. And what they've basically proven through this microscopic examination is that these spears were spinning in flight. The tapering on them and the shaping of the spears was designed to make the spear spin in flight. And just like the rifling on a bullet, that gave the spear distance and stability. And so these spears are absolutely lethal. And like I say, Schöningen, Germany, if you do a search on that and the word spear, they'll probably come up. But obviously long after the concept of shamanism and indeed animism, if they indeed they are concepts. The point with these spears is that even though they were amazingly wicked developments by the time, they hadn't always been like that. You know, going back in time, they went from the chimpanzee's pointy stick to these amazing high-tech aerodynamic danger weapons, you know. Over a long period of time, shamans refined them and refined them and refined them. The point with that is, even with those things, even at that height of that weapons development technology, you still had to get reasonably close to these big dangerous animals in order to bring them down. This is not something you can do from a distance or from your armchair. You know, you had to get reasonably close, and those animals are good at two things. One, some of them are very, very good at spotting you from a long distance, because they've also got chelicity. And legging it, running away. They're the least of your worries, really. The other ones are really, really good at tearing you to pieces. So you can see why they needed the animism, just like the Herzog flying through the forest, you know. It needs not to lose the lock on its prey, but it also needs not to lose its awareness of the branches, or it'll break its neck on the branch. One of those early animist hunters, he needed his animism. He needed his animism because who's to say, for instance, even, you know, one is he needs the sense of where the animals are and where he should position himself, how he sneaks up on them to get close enough to use his lethal spear. But in another sense is he has to be wary of that animal's going to turn on him and rip him to pieces. But he also has to have that Herzog focus, in that who's to say one of the other members, so a lot of these animals are social animals, one of these other animals isn't, or a different type of an animal, a lion, for instance, because remember, a lot of this early stuff happened in Africa, they isn't sneaking up behind you while you're hunting this thing, yeah? So you need your animism, your amazing link into the natural world to keep you alive in that hunting activity. And you know, they were doing this stuff for a living. If they didn't get prey, just like any other hunting animal, they wouldn't last. So what I'm saying is, animism, it's your link to the natural world at one level, and it's your relation, it's the parental relationship of the natural world to you at another level. But it's adaptive. It's not no reason. It's not a bunch of primitive people sat around believing things. It's there for a purpose, and if it wasn't there, we wouldn't be here.
Would shamans participate in the hunting themselves as well, or would the tribe not want to risk their tool of the shaman?
This is a very interesting question. This is a very interesting question in terms of what's a shaman, because for instance, the San people that we just talked about, you find that actually quite a high proportion of that, you know, in a pastoral society, it's a relatively low proportion of the people who are shamans, yeah? So if, say, in a group of 20, you might have one, if you're lucky, yeah? Among the San people, almost half, getting on for half of their population, engage in activities that might be called something beyond just animism. Getting on for about half the population of any San community will be engaged in, you know, what we would call shamanistic technique, going beyond level 1, if you like. And so the problem with using the San people, because true hunter-gatherer societies are so rare in this day and age, is it's a sample of one, or a sample of small number. You know, if you think of the Yakut who still live by hunting, it's a sample of a very small number. So who's to say, really? But what I would say is that it's certainly possible for any number, theoretically possible for any number of people within a group to be shamans. The fact that that isn't what we don't see that. We don't see that of a group. We rarely see more than about 40%. I mean, it's probably the highest in the world percentage. 40-ish% of people in a San group, sometimes you could say they were shamans. The fact that we see that or less suggests that it's not particularly adaptive for everybody within a group to be a shaman. But would shamans go hunting? Absolutely, they would have to, because they're the technologists. They're within hunter-gatherer societies, they're the people who really, really understand what's going on. And how do you develop, for instance, a weapons technology for hunting without being a hunter?
Well, and testing your
and
ideas.
Hunting is for your spirit, quite apart from anything else. Shamans want, if you're into animal spirit dance like me, you at the very least you're going to want to go along with those hunters when they go, because you want to see the animals. That's shamans. As we said, you remember you asked me one time, where would animal spirits be found? And I said, I'd look anywhere you please, any animistic, shamanistic society, and you found them. Well, here we've just looked at the sand, and hey, there they are. So I think try in hunter-gatherer societies, just try and stop the shaman going out hunting. You might have a problem. Yeah, certainly in San society, all the shamans go hunting. In pastoral society, as we've said, there starts to be, and for instance, in San society, there's a very flat social hierarchy, very, very flat. In pastoral societies, there starts to be more of a gradient. It's not like the gradient you get in settled civilizations, but with people, the untouchables. I don't mean untouchables as in they're down there. I mean the people who are right up at the top of society. The leaders, the mighty ones. It's almost a vertical drop on the hierarchy within society. You get more of a gradual slope within pastoral societies, but the shamans being clever people, that to a certain extent, they very often, even in Mongolia, today, they manipulate that. They are aware of how, if they want, they can make their lives a bit easier by one of the activities that's widely used in esoteric groups is myth making. That's the creation of myths and tales to influence society. That's one of the main skills that's been developed in esotericism over the few thousand years. And shamans are well aware of that. Nobody's more aware of these kind of issues than shamans. So, you get this concept of white shamans and black shamans, and, shamans are well able, in pastoral societies especially, shamans are well able to manipulate the people who are in their communities if they want to. Yeah. So I'm not saying the shamans are all the purest of the pure, that they certainly have that capability. And the truth is, some of them do and some of them don't.
I think it's worth mentioning now as well. I mean, I've recently watched a TV series called Bruce Parry's Tribe, and I mention it just for one reason, and that is it's an interesting look at the different societies out there. I'm not going to say hunter-gatherer societies specifically, but it's an interesting look, because we were talking about how animism became more exoteric as time goes on, and I think certain tribes, which Bruce Parry goes and lives with, the series where he goes and lives with a tribe for 2 weeks to a month or something.
I haven't seen it.
It's brilliant. He lives the life of the tribe, okay? And in one episode he goes to where he stays with the Kombe tribe, and they're still tree dwellers, and clearly, not many people in the tribe, and they're still quite animistic.
Sure.
But yet there's another episode, I forget the name of it, I think the Sanama tribe, where they are pretty much on DMT all the time. I think it's a really interesting look at how far even animistic cultures and societies can go.
Sure.
So that's one resource for people to see. So long as you view it in an educated kind of way, and you don't see it all as isn't
it a bit like Pandora's box, like you said?
Yeah.
It's in a way, for animist societies as history has definitely shown, are extremely vulnerable to non-animist societies, dominated cultures. they are no match because they're hunter-gatherer societies, for instance. They developed their way of life over a couple of million years, but they don't have good defenses when they come up against the sophisticated exotericism of civilization.
The ability to influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see, I mean, for instance, here's a example of what might happen. I go to a hunter-gatherer society in the first generation. I go to a hunter-gatherer society who've never met anybody from a civilized society. No such thing clearly exists in the world. But it just say that it did. And the first thing I say to them is, "Oh, tell me what you believe. Yeah, what are your beliefs? What do you believe?" Yeah. Hunter-gatherer people tend to be nice people. They're accommodating. And pastoral people as well. I've talked about, let's say animistic people tend to be very nice people. I've talked about how lovely Mongols are. They're really lovely people on the whole. And they're very accommodating, and they definitely don't want you to feel uncomfortable. They're very, very generous. They're very, very welcoming, and they don't want you to feel uncomfortable. They absolutely will not challenge you on your belief system, on anything like that. Not because they agree with your belief system, but because they don't want to upset you. And the greatest, and some people think the greatest, some people think the most terrible Mongol of all time was the absolute classic example of this, Genghis Khan. The correct way to pronounce it is Chinggis Khan, but we've talked about Mongol pronunciation, so let's go with Genghis Khan, yeah? Genghis Khan, even in his, seemingly mighty position, bent over backwards to be nice to Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and these sort of people. In his, it's quite funny, Genghis Khan's idea of palace was to build the mother of all gers, yeah? So he just took a traditional Mongol, what we would call a yurt, and he just built it on a ridiculously large scale. That was his idea of a palace. And outside of his palace, he had a Nestorian Christian church, he had an Islamic mosque, he had a Buddhist temple, and they were like in a ring around the front entrance to his palace. He showed reverence to all of the exoteric religions of the peoples that he came across. And with good reason, because he knew to build this enormous empire. Well, two reasons. One is he knew to build this enormous empire, he needed the cooperations of the people that he was going to rule. That empire at its height stretched from the walls of Vienna to the eastern seaboard of Korea. That's just one colossal empire. Yeah. And, but also he was an animist, Most Western exotericists, they're like, I believe in, so let's call them religions A and B. I say, I believe in religion A and you believe in religion B. And I say, well, no, you're wrong. Religion A is right. And you say, no, you're wrong. Religion B is right, Genghis Khan showed animism, showed what an animist he was, in that he sort of had a completely different attitude. He said, okay, so let's just support all of these religions, because you never know, one of them might be right. That's a very, very animist kind of attitude, Yeah. There you are, Genghis Khan, the most famous animist of all time, And again, it shows this difference, for instance, in Japan, they say, you're born Shinto, you're married Christian, and you die Buddhist. That's in modern Japan, you're literally born into the Shinto religion. Most Japanese people like to wear a Western wedding dress and have a Western style, Christian style wedding, the white wedding kind of thing. But then when they die, they have a Buddhist funeral, And actually when Westerners, for instance, Father Bernard Pettigen, who was one of the first people to open a church in Japan, when Japan came out of the Tokugawa period and into the modern period, when Christianity was effectively unbanned in Japan. They found shockingly, they found that the native religions in Japan, different branches of Shinto. We talked about the Shinshu-kyo, the new religions. There were lots of those very popular at that time in Japan. He was shocked by how accommodating they were. You know, we'll help you open up your seemingly rival religion in our country. You know, whatever help you need, just tell us. And it shows, you know, Japanese slightly more animist than Westerners at that time. You know, and so it shows the reverence to nature. You're a fellow human being. You believe all this stuff, and you know, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm an animist, but I certainly respect you. I certainly want to help you, because, you know, that's what animists do. Animist communities, they help each other out more than anything. You know, bonobos, they help each other out, you know. And so why shouldn't I help you move your religion thing into our country? Don't see any reason why not, even though it's not my religion, if you see what I mean. It's a difference in attitude, and before animism becomes beliefs, animism is a kind of attitude. And before it's a kind of attitude, it's a reverence for nature. And before it's a reverence for nature, it's an adaptive hook into the environment that's absolutely essential to survival.
It's very interesting you're talking about how nice animists can be, because I'm just thinking that Bruce Parry program again, every single animist community he went into were the nicest people in the world.
Yeah,
really were.
And you want to see our animistic dance? No problem. You know? You know, what else would you like us to do? You know, It's that kind of thing. You know, and really, to study animism, if you wanted to study animistic societies as an anthropologist, you know, if I was thinking to myself what I would do as a you know, an anthropologist, rather than, if I could find such a society, you know, it would be great, you know, an untouched animistic, preferably hunter-gatherer society. I wouldn't be strolling in there and joining in their dance. I'd be setting up hidden cameras, you know. I wouldn't want them to know I was there, you know. I think I'd get a lot more useful information, you know.
Yeah. Have you got any references that people could learn a little bit more about animism from? It's hard.
I always come back to Eliade's book. You know, it is a book. It might sound like that. You know, me and Eliade, we probably wouldn't hit it off. But actually, you'd be wrong about that. I have a reference for the guy. I know how much work went into that monumental work, and it's, you know, I don't necessarily agree with the approach or anything like that, but gosh, if you ever want a resource, that book is it, you know.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, okay, so we're kind of venturing towards the end, I think, now. One last question. So, somebody just venturing into the world of shamanism and animism, what's the one piece of advice you could give them to help or guide them to basically not mess up?
Yeah, so to not mess up we've talked about, you know, I'm just going to go on about Chilisti again, Joe, you know that. But maybe I'll give you a different take on it, okay? A different take on it. Animals tend to be afraid of fire. And there's very good reason for that. It's adaptive. Lightning strikes caused fires in the earliest times, millions and millions and millions of years ago. They have throughout the history of life on Earth, probably, certainly life on the land. And so fire kills animals. It does. It kills them. You know, whole forests get burned down, you know, grasslands, and animals die in that. So it's naturally adaptive for animals to be scared of fire. Now, shamans, when they came along, shamans, through their interest, not just in animism, but beyond animism and what goes on under the metaphorical bonnet of nature, shamans come to an understanding of that nature is all about change. Nature is all about energy changes. And it's a continuous change. So what you would say is a shaman sees nature not as a bunch of little boxes and categories, but they learn to see it as a process of energy change. The early human shamans, you know, among these hunter-gatherer societies, you know, from Australopithecus, this was way before we ever became Homo sapiens, if we want to use those labels.
Yeah.
They were afraid of fire too. They were absolutely terrified of it, just about every other animal on the surface of the land. But they understood that through their experimentation, going beyond that involvement and reverence with nature that is animism, going beyond that, they understood that the universe is about change, and they saw, just like they saw in the dogs, a kindred spirit, they saw in the fire a kindred spirit, because fire is nothing other than an energy change. It's a very, very powerful and dangerous energy change, but it's an energy change. And so, of course, where all the other animals are running away from the fire, the shamans were drawn towards it. They probably were pretty scared of it, but they overcame their fear because they realized that understanding reality, understanding in the mind and the spirit and the body all at the same time, the way that shamans understand things. Understanding reality is also important. They put themselves in a place where they tested themselves. Can we go into this place where there is a real danger, i.e. dealing with this fire stuff, and can we use our shamanistic powers, our shamanistic skills? Is our shamanism powerful enough to overcome that? That's them putting themselves on the line. That's them testing themselves. Yeah, That's them not just sitting around believing that they are mighty over fire, because they would have ended up toast, wouldn't they? But it's coming back to a different way of looking at Telicity. Telicity is about, I don't know, I hate to use that phrase, keep it real. A friend of ours uses that. Yeah. But really, that the advice is, don't lose your connection to reality. In fact, go further than that. Rejoice in your connection to reality. Shamanism is not about meditating away to some imaginary palace in the clouds and becoming aloof from human society and imagining weird and wonderful things. It's the exact opposite of that. You want to get closer to reality. You want to get much closer to what's real than somebody who is a member of a settled and civilized society. You definitely don't want to move in the other direction and get even more kind of unreal, if you see what I mean. So my advice would be, keep looking at what you're doing, keep checking, testing even yourself. Remember, I talked about that. I'm not advocating the wild run, okay? But maybe testing yourself in more lightweight ways than that. But just if you know what I'm talking about when we talked about the wild run, that's a great example of me testing myself. Does my shamanism, does my animism actually work? Or am I just imagining it? I don't recommend testing yourself in any situation like that that's potentially lethal. But I'm using that as an extreme example of something where you can do it in much more lightweight ways. You need to keep looking at yourself. And if you've got a guide, if you've got a teacher, they will keep you on this anyway. If they're worth their salt, basically, they will keep you on this anyway. That's the blessing of having a guide. But keep looking at yourself and saying, am I imagining in this? Am I making this all up? Or is this something tangible? Is this something real? Is this something I can do things with? Can I do stuff with my shamanism? Does my animism contribute to my life? Does my shamanism contribute to the lives of the people around me? Does it really? Empirically, in fact, not in imagination, not in some baseline ratiocination, in the roots of the tree. Yeah. Does it really, in actual fact, contribute positively, if you're talking about shamanism, to the lives of the people around you, if you're talking about animism, to your life?
What a fantastic way to end the podcast. Thank you so much, Damon. That's been amazing.
Likewise, thank you, Joe.
And we'll see you all next week. And thank you ever so much. See you soon.